the misty harbor of St. Alden's Cove, a fisherman lies dead on his boat, his throat bruised, his net slashed with purpose. Hercule Poirot, the master of mysteries, steps into a web of secrets, rivalries, hidden contraband, and a merchant's dark ambition. Was it the bitter rival, the nervous crewman, or the elegant woman with too much to lose? As the tides turn, Poirot unravels a smuggling ring where greed led to murder, and the truth rises like the sea itself. Chapter 1. The Body on the Boat. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged cliffs of St. Alden's Cove, a sleepy fishing village where the sea whispered secrets and the fog clung like a jealous lover. Hercule Poirot, seeking respite from the clamor of London, had chosen this remote corner of the English coast for its promise of solitude. His morning walk, however, was interrupted by a piercing scream that cut through the mist, sharp as a gull's cry. With a sigh, he adjusted the brim of his immaculate Homburg hat, smoothed his meticulously waxed mustache, and hastened toward the harbor, his polished shoes clicking against the cobblestones. The village quay was a tableau of chaos. Fishermen, their faces weathered as the cliffs, stood in knots, muttering darkly. Women in shawls clutched their baskets, their eyes wide with dread. At the center of the commotion bobbed the Ebony tide, a sturdy fishing vessel, its paint chipped but proud, moored against the weathered dock. On its deck, sprawled in an ungainly heap, lay Captain Amos Reed, a man whose name was as familiar in St. Alden's as the tide itself. His weathered features, once animated by a booming laugh, were frozen in death, his throat marred by cruel purplish marks that told of strangulation. Beside him, the boat's heavy fishing net lay in a tangled heap, its thick ropes slashed and frayed as if clawed by some vengeful beast. Poirot's sharp eyes, undimmed by the early hour, took in every detail. The captain's calloused hands still curled as if grasping for life. The dew that glistened on the deck, undisturbed save for a single set of muddy bootprints, and the net, its deliberate ruin speaking of intent rather than accident. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his voice soft but resonant. A crime most calculated, and yet so bold. He stepped aboard, his movements precise, avoiding the prints as if they were sacred relics. Inspector Hargrove, a stout man with a face creased by years of squinting into the wind, approached with a deferential nod. "Mr. Poirot, a stroke of luck you're here," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with relief. "Amos Reed, murdered, plain as day, strangled by the look of it. But this net, why ruin a good net? It's worth half a season's catch." Poirot's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles, his green eyes glinting like sea glass. "The net, Inspector, is not merely broken. It is a clue, perhaps the loudest voice in this silent scene. We must listen to what it says." The crowd parted as Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering over the marks on Reed's throat. The bruising was deep, the work of strong hands, yet the deck showed no signs of a prolonged struggle, no scuffs, no overturned gear. "Curious," Poirot mused aloud. "The captain was a man of strength, no? Yet he did not fight long. Why?" Hargrove scratched his chin. "Caught by surprise, maybe. Knew his killer, trusted him." Poirot nodded, his mind already weaving threads of possibility. "Précisément. Trust is a dangerous thing, Inspector." He rose, turning his attention to the net. Its cuts were clean, made with a sharp blade, not the ragged tears of natural wear or haste. A single knot, still intact, caught his eye, tangled with a tiny scrap of red thread, foreign to the coarse hemp. He plucked it free with a handkerchief, tucking it into his pocket without comment. Hargrove watched, puzzled. "Evidence, Mr. Poirot?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, Inspector, or perhaps a whisper from the truth." As the coroner arrived to claim the body, Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping the harbor. The village was waking now, its rhythm disrupted by death. Fishermen cast sidelong glances, their voices hushed. A woman wept quietly, her shawl drawn tight. Poirot's mind, however, was far from the clamor. "This boat," he said softly, "is a stage, and Captain Reed's death is but the first act. We must find the players, Inspector, and learn their parts." With a final glance at the ebony tide, its black hull gleaming like a mourner's veil, Poirot turned toward the village, his little gray cells already stirring with the promise of a mystery unveiled. Chapter 2. The Suspects Emerge. The morning sun had burned away the fog that cloaked St. Alden's Cove, leaving the village bathed in a pale, unforgiving light. Hercule Poirot, seated at a corner table in the Anchor Inn, sipped his tisane with the precision of a man who found comfort in order. The inn, with its low beams and smoky air, was the heart of the village's gossip, and Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, had chosen it as the stage for his first inquiry into the murder of Captain Amos Reed. The death aboard the Ebony Tide was no mere tragedy. It was a puzzle, and Poirot's little gray cells hummed with anticipation. Inspector Hargrove, his face still creased with the strain of the morning's discovery, had arranged for the three principal figures in the drama to meet Poirot at the inn. "They're the ones closest to Reed, Mr. Poirot," he had said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Elias Cobb, a rival fisherman who'd sooner spit than shake Reed's hand. Tom Harrow, Reed's crewman, a lad with shifty eyes. And Margaret Vane, a merchant who handled Reed's catch and had words with him over money. If anyone knows what happened, it's one of them. Poirot had nodded, his expression serene. "Bien, Inspector. Let us meet these players and see what roles they play in this tragedy." The inn's parlor was a modest affair, its walls adorned with faded nautical charts and a single oil painting of a storm-tossed ship. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with the village's unease. Poirot sat at a polished oak table, his notebook open, his pencil poised like a conductor's baton. The suspects arrived one by one, each bringing with them an air of guarded suspicion. First was Elias Cobb, a man whose very presence seemed carved from the cliffs of St. Alden's. His face was a map of sun and salt, with deep lines etched around eyes that gleamed with a mixture of defiance and wariness. His oilskin coat, patched and worn, hung loosely on his broad frame, and his hands, gnarled as driftwood, fidgeted with a length of rope he carried as if it were an extension of himself. He sat heavily, his chair creaking under his weight, and fixed Poirot with a stare that might have intimidated a lesser man. "Monsieur Cobb," Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. "You were no friend to Captain Reed, I understand. Your rivalry over the fishing grounds was known to all." Cobb's lips curled into a sneer, revealing a chipped tooth. "Aye, Reed was a greedy dog, always casting his nets where mine ought to be. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're fishing for." His tone was gruff, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes flicked toward the door. "And where were you, monsieur, on the night of the murder?" Poirot asked, his gaze unyielding. Cobb shifted, the rope in his hands twisting tighter. "Home, mending nets with my wife. Ellen, ask her, she'll tell you." Poirot made a note, his pencil scratching softly. "And did you see Captain Reed that evening, perhaps at the harbor?" Cobb's eyes narrowed. "I was nowhere near the Ebony tide. My own boat needed work, and I was at it till late." Poirot inclined his head, his expression inscrutable. "Merci, Monsieur Cobb. We shall speak again." As Cobb lumbered out, his boots thudding on the worn floorboards, Tom Harrow entered. The young crewman was a stark contrast to Cobb's weathered bulk. Barely 20, with a lean frame and tousled hair the color of wet sand, Harrow carried himself with the nervous energy of a cornered animal. His eyes, a pale blue, darted around the room, lingering on the windows as if he longed to bolt. His hands, calloused from hauling nets, twitched at his sides, and Poirot noted a faint bruise on his knuckles, fresh and purplish, as if from a recent blow. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said, gesturing to the chair, "you sailed with Captain Reed on the Ebony tide, a trusted crewman, oui?" Harrow nodded, swallowing hard. "Aye, sir. Been with him 2 years. Good captain, mostly." His voice was soft, almost boyish, but there was a hardness beneath it, a shadow that Poirot's keen senses detected. "And what? Can you tell me of the night he died?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. Harrow's fingers clenched, then relaxed. "I wasn't on the boat, sir. I'd finished work at dusk, went home to my lodgings. Last I saw the captain, he was checking the nets." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes like twin lanterns. "And was there anything unusual about Captain Reed? Any secrets he kept?" Harrow's face paled, and he licked his lips. "Secrets? No, sir. He was just particular about the boat, liked things done his way." Poirot smiled faintly, noting the hesitation, the way Harrow's gaze slid away. "Merci, Monsieur Harrow. You have been most helpful." As Harrow rose, his movements jerky, Poirot added, "One thing more. That bruise on your hand, how did you come by it?" Harrow froze, then muttered, "Caught it in a winch, sir." "Clumsy of me." He fled the room before Poirot could press further. The final suspect, Margaret Vane, entered with the poise of a queen. A woman in her late 30s, she was an anomaly in St. Albans, her tailored dress and pearl brooch speaking of wealth far beyond the village's humble means. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her green eyes met Poirot's with a cool, assessing gaze. She sat gracefully, her hands folded in her lap, exuding a confidence that bordered on defiance. "Madame Van," Poirot began, his voice courteous but edged with curiosity. "You were Captain Reed's business associate, n'est-ce pas? You purchased his catch for trade in the city." Margaret inclined her head, her smile polite but guarded. "Yes, Mr. Poirot. Amos supplied the finest fish in the county. Our arrangement was profitable for both of us, until recently." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Oui? And what changed?" Margaret's smile tightened. "A matter of unpaid invoices. Amos owed me a considerable sum, and we had words about it a week ago. But it was business, nothing more." Poirot's pencil tapped his notebook. "And where were you, madame, on the night of his death?" Margaret's gaze never wavered. "In my office, balancing accounts until late. My clerk, Mr. Grayson, can confirm it." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the faintest tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers brushed the brooch as if seeking reassurance. "Merci, Madame Vane. Your candor is appreciated." As she rose to leave, Poirot's eyes lingered on her retreating figure, his mind cataloging the subtleties of her demeanor. With the interviews concluded, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. The parlor was quiet now, save for the crackle of the fire and the distant murmur of the sea. Inspector Hargrove, who had lingered in the doorway, stepped forward. "Well, Mr. Poirot, what do you make of them?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mon ami, each carries a burden of secrets. Cobb's defiance masks fear. Harrow's nerves betray guilt, and Madame Vane's composure is too perfect, like a painting with a flaw hidden beneath the varnish. But it is the net, the broken net, that holds the key." Hargrove frowned, scratching his head. "The net? You keep mentioning it, but it's just fishing gear, ruined in a scuffle, maybe." Poirot shook his head, his mustache twitching. "No, Inspector. The net was not broken in haste. Its cuts were deliberate, made with a blade, not torn by struggle. Why destroy a tool so vital to a fisherman's livelihood? It is a message, perhaps, or a distraction. We must learn its purpose." Poirot rose, adjusting his coat with meticulous care. "I shall return to the harbor, Inspector, to examine the ebony tide once more. But first, I must walk, to let the little gray cells breathe." He stepped into the crisp air of St. Alden's, the village bustling now with midday activity. Fishermen hauled their catches, their voices a low hum, while women bartered at the market stalls, their glances darting toward the quay, where death had cast its shadow. As Poirot strolled along the cobbled street, his mind sifted through the morning's observations. Elias Cobb's rivalry with Reed was no secret, but his alibi, supported by his wife, was too convenient, too rehearsed. The mud on his boots, fresh from the harbor, suggested he had been near the water, despite his claims. Tom Harrow's bruise was troubling, a mark of violence that his weak explanation could not dismiss. And Margaret Vane, her wealth and composure set her apart, but her dispute with Reed over money hinted at deeper motives. Poirot's thoughts turned to the red thread he had found in the net, a tiny clue that seemed to whisper of someone's presence aboard the ebony tide. He paused at the edge of the village, where the road gave way to a rocky path leading to the cliffs. The sea stretched before him, gray and restless, its waves crashing against the rocks with a rhythm that seemed to echo his thoughts. "The ebony tide," he murmured, "is more than a boat. It is a stage, and each suspect plays a part. But who is the director of this grim drama?" He turned back toward the harbor, his steps purposeful, his mind alight with the certainty that the truth, like the tide, would soon reveal itself. The Anchor Inn faded behind him as he walked, the village's secrets swirling in his mind like the eddies of the sea. Cobb's anger, Harrow's fear, Vane's calculation, each was a thread in the tapestry of murder, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct, would weave them together. The broken net, the red thread, the muddy boot prints, they were not mere details but signposts to the killer's identity. As he neared the quay, the silhouette of the ebony tide loomed against the horizon, a silent witness to the crime that had shattered the peace of St. Alden's Cove. Chapter 3. The Village. Whispers. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Alden's Cove, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets and bathing the village in a golden haze that did little to dispel the chill of unease. Hercule Poirot, his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm, moved through the village with the air of a man attuned to its pulse. The murder of Captain Amos Reed had stirred St. Alden's like a stone cast into a still pond, and Poirot, ever the collector of human subtleties, sought the ripples of truth hidden in the village's whispers. The salty tang of the sea mingled with the scent of fresh baked bread from the bakery. and the cries of gulls overhead seemed to echo the villagers' restless murmurs. Poirot's destination was the harbor, but he allowed himself a leisurely pace, pausing at the market square where women haggled over fish and gossip with equal fervor. His ears, sharp as his mind, caught fragments of conversation. Reed was always out late, wasn't he? Never trusted that Harrow boy. Cobb's been sour since Reed took the North Shoals. Poirot's lips curved slightly. The village was a chorus, and each voice sang a note of the mystery. His first stop was the harbor master's shack, a weathered hut perched at the edge of the quay, its windows clouded with salt spray. Jethro Pyle, the harbor master, was a wiry old man, with eyes like polished pebbles and a tongue that wagged as freely as the tides. He sat on a stool, mending a length of rope, and greeted Poirot with a nod that was half respect, half curiosity. "Mr. Poirot, ain't it? Heard you're poking into Amos Reed's murder. Bad business, that." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache impeccable despite the sea breeze. "Oui, Monsieur Pyle. I seek the truth, and the harbor, I think, holds many secrets. What can you tell me of Captain Reed's habits?" Jethro's fingers paused, the rope dangling like a confession. "Amos was a good man, but odd of late. Took the Ebony tide out at queer hours, midnight sometimes, when honest folk are abed. Said he was chasing better catches, but his hauls weren't no bigger." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And did you see him, monsieur, on these late-night voyages?" Jethro scratched his grizzled chin. "Not always, but 2 nights afore he died, I saw lights on his boat, moving slow, like he was meeting someone. Couldn't see who, mind you. Fog was thick as porridge." Poirot made a mental note, his mind sketching a picture of clandestine rendezvous. "Merci, Monsieur Pyle. Your eyes are most observant." Leaving the shack, Poirot wandered toward the Anchor Inn, where the barmaid, a rosy-cheeked woman named Liza, was known to hear more than she served. The inn was quieter now, its lunchtime crowd dispersed, and Liza was wiping tankards with a rag, her eyes darting to Poirot as he entered. "Good day, mademoiselle," he said, his voice warm as the fire crackling nearby. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I inquire about Captain Reed. You knew him, oui?" Liza's hands stilled, her expression wary. "Aye, sir. Amos was in here often, liked his ale and his stories. Always kind, but he'd been moody lately." Poirot leaned closer, his tone conspiratorial. "Moody, you say? And did he speak of troubles? Perhaps with his crewman, Tom Harrow?" Liza's lips pursed, and she glanced around before lowering her voice. "He didn't name names, but last week he was in here, grumbling about things hidden in the nets. Said he'd caught someone meddling with his gear, and he meant to put a stop to it. Tom was with him that night, looking like a cat in a rainstorm." Poirot's eyebrows lifted, a spark of interest in his eyes. "And this meddling? Did he say more?" Liza shook her head. "Not to me, sir, but he was angry, and Amos wasn't one to anger lightly." Poirot thanked her, leaving a coin on the counter, his mind turning over the hint of betrayal aboard the Ebony tide. His next encounter was less planned. As he crossed the village green, he spied Ellen Cobb, Elias Cobb's wife, hanging laundry in the yard of their modest cottage. She was a slight woman, her face pale and drawn, her hands rough from years of mending nets and scrubbing floors. Poirot approached with a courteous bow, his hat in hand. "Madame Cobb, a moment, if you please. I am Hercule Poirot, and I investigate the sad affair of Captain Reed." Ellen's hands froze on a damp shirt, her eyes flickering with unease. "I don't know nothing, sir," she said quickly, but Poirot's gentle smile disarmed her. "Madame, I seek only the truth. Your husband, Monsieur Cobb, says he was home with you the night of the murder. Is this so?" Ellen nodded, her fingers twisting the shirt. "Aye, he was here, mending nets by the fire. Didn't go out till morning." Her voice was firm, but Poirot noted the way her gaze slid to the ground, the slight tremor in her hands. "And yet," he said softly, "I hear Monsieur Cobb was seen near the harbor that night. A curious discrepancy, non?" Ellen's face flushed, and she stammered, "Folk talk nonsense, sir. Elias was home, I swear it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, madame. Your loyalty is admirable." As he turned to leave, he noticed a basket of laundry at Ellen's feet, a red scarf among the linens, its edge frayed as if a piece had been torn away. The memory of the red thread from the broken net flashed in his mind, and he filed it away, a silent clue in the growing mosaic of the case. He bid Ellen good day and continued his walk, the village's secrets swirling around him like the sea mist. Poirot's final stop was the cliffs overlooking the harbor, where the wind carried the tang of salt and the distant crash of waves. He stood, his coat buttoned against the chill, gazing at the gray expanse of the sea. The horizon was a line of mystery, much like the crime he sought to unravel. "The truth," he murmured, "is like the tide, always shifting, yet always returning. Captain Reed sailed into danger, and someone ensured he would not return. But who? And why the net?" His thoughts returned to the suspects. Elias Cobb's rivalry with Reed was a motive as old as the sea, but his alibi, though shaky, was supported by his wife's testimony. Tom Harrow's nervousness and the bruise on his hand suggested a man with something to hide, perhaps linked to the things hidden in the nets Liza had mentioned. Margaret Vane's wealth and her dispute with Reed hinted at a financial motive, but her composure was too polished, too controlled. And then there was the net itself, its deliberate destruction a puzzle that gnawed at Poirot's mind. Was it a symbol, a distraction, or a clue to something hidden aboard the Ebony tide? As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Poirot turned back toward the village. The harbor lay below. The Ebony tide, a dark silhouette against the water, its secrets locked within its hull. Poirot's steps were measured, his mind a whirl of possibilities. "The village speaks," he said to himself, "and I, Hercule Poirot, listen. The whispers will lead to the truth, and the truth will set the tide free." With a final glance at the sea, he descended the cliff path, ready to unravel the next thread in the mystery of St. Alden's Cove. Chapter 4. The Broken Net. The harbor of St. Alden's Cove lay under a sky bruised with the threat of rain, its waters lapping restlessly against the quay as if impatient to reveal their secrets. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the gathering clouds, stood aboard the Ebony tide, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the deck with the precision of a watchmaker. The boat, though modest, was a study in order, its ropes coiled neatly, its gear stowed with care, save for the ruined net, which sprawled across the stern like a wounded creature, its slashed strands a silent accusation. To Poirot, this was no mere fishing vessel. It was a canvas painted with the strokes of murder, and he intended to read every brushstroke. Inspector Hargrove, his coat flapping in the wind, joined Poirot on the deck, his face a mixture of skepticism and deference. "Back again, Mr. Poirot?" he said, rubbing his hands against the chill. "Thought you'd seen all there was this morning." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mon ami, the scene of a crime is like a book. One must read it many times to understand its meaning. The net, in particular, has much to say." Hargrove grunted, his eyes narrowing at the tangled heap. "Looks like a mess to me. Probably cut in the struggle." Poirot shook his head, his movements deliberate as he knelt beside the net. "No, Inspector. Observe." He lifted a section of the rope, pointing to the edges where the fibers were severed. "The cuts are clean, made with a sharp blade, not torn by force. This was no accident, nor the result of a scuffle. Someone wished the net to appear ruined, but why?" Hargrove frowned, his brow furrowing. "To make it look like a fight? Or maybe to hide something?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Précisément. But what was hidden, and by whom?" He examined the net more closely, his fingers tracing the knots with the delicacy of a surgeon. The damage was extensive, but not random. The cuts were concentrated in one area, as if targeting a specific section. Near the edge, caught in a snarl of hemp, he found the red thread he had noticed that morning, its vibrant hue stark against the drab rope. He held it up to the light, his expression thoughtful. "This thread, Inspector, does not belong to the net. It is fine, perhaps from a scarf or garment, and it tells us someone was here, someone careless." He tucked it back into his handkerchief, his mind cataloging its significance. Poirot's gaze swept the deck, noting the absence of blood or signs of a prolonged struggle. The muddy boot prints he had observed earlier led from the gangplank to the body's resting place, but they were singular, suggesting one visitor, not a melee. He moved to the captain's small cabin, a cramped space smelling of tar and tobacco. Inside, a logbook lay open on a narrow table, its pages filled with Reed's scrawled handwriting. Poirot flipped through it, his eyes narrowing at an entry dated 2 days before the murder. "Trouble with the cargo again. Must confront him tonight." The pronoun was ambiguous, but the word cargo sparked Poirot's curiosity. "Cargo, Monsieur Reed," he murmured. "Or something less lawful?" He turned to Hargrove, who was peering over his shoulder. "Inspector, this logbook, has it been examined?" Hargrove nodded. "Aye, but it's mostly fishing notes, catches, weather, that sort of thing. That bit about cargo caught my eye, but it's vague. Reed wasn't one for details." Poirot's lips pursed. "Vague, perhaps, but not meaningless. A fisherman does not speak of cargo lightly. We must consider what the Ebony tide carried besides fish." Leaving the cabin, Poirot circled the deck once more, his attention drawn to a small hatch near the stern, half hidden by a coil of rope. He lifted it, revealing a shallow compartment used for storing spare gear. Inside, he found nothing unusual, some rusted tools, a spare lantern, but the wood at the edge bore fresh scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged out. "Curieux," he said, running his finger along the marks. "This hatch has been opened recently, and not for routine work. Something was removed or hidden." Hargrove scratched his head. "Smuggling, you think? Reed wasn't the type, but times are hard." Poirot stood, brushing his gloves with care. "Smuggling, oui, is possible, but if Captain Reed was involved, or discovered such a scheme, it would explain much: his late-night sails, his anger, his death. The net, I think, was cut to conceal what it held, or to suggest a motive that does not exist." He paused, his gaze drifting to the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed like silent witnesses. "We must learn more of this cargo, Inspector, and who stood to gain from its secrecy." As they stepped off the Ebony tide, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the deck like tentative questions. Poirot glanced back at the boat, its black hull glistening in the wet. "This vessel," he said softly, "is a vault of secrets. The net is its lock, and we must find the key." Hargrove, pulling his coat tighter, looked skeptical. "You put a lot of faith in that net, Mr. Poirot. What's next?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Next, mon ami, we test the alibis of our suspects. Their words are like the tide. They may seem steady, but they shift with pressure." As they walked back to the village, the rain thickened, cloaking St. Albans in a silver veil. Poirot's mind was a whirl of details: the red thread, the logbook's cryptic note, the scratched hatch, the deliberate cuts in the net. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and he, Hercule Poirot, would fit them together with the patience of a craftsman. The murder of Amos Reed was no random act. It was a performance, and the broken net was its most telling prop. With a final glance at the harbor, Poirot quickened his pace, eager to unravel the next thread in the mystery of the Ebony tide. Chapter 5. The Rival's Alibi. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle over St. Albans Cove, cloaking the village in a damp hush that seemed to muffle even the sea's restless murmur. Hercule Poirot, his umbrella tilted against the weather, navigated the muddy path to Elias Cobb's cottage, a squat, weather-beaten dwelling perched on the edge of the village like a barnacle clinging to a rock. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and fish, and Poirot, ever meticulous, stepped carefully to preserve the shine of his shoes. His purpose was clear: to test the alibi of Elias Cobb, the rival fisherman whose enmity with Captain Amos Reed was as much a fixture of St. Albans as the tides themselves. The cottage was a study in neglect, its shingles curling like old paper, its windows clouded with grime. Poirot knocked sharply, his gloved hand precise, and the door creaked open to reveal Ellen Cobb, her face pale as sea foam, her eyes darting with the wariness of a creature accustomed to storms. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Elias is in the back, working on nets. I'll fetch him." Poirot inclined his head, his expression courteous but unyielding. "Merci, madame. I shall wait, but I would speak with you both, if you please." Inside, the cottage was cramped and dim, the air heavy with the smell of tar and damp wool. A fire sputtered in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across a table littered with fishing gear, hooks, twine, and a knife with a worn handle. Poirot's eyes lingered on the knife, its blade catching the firelight, but he made no comment as Ellen disappeared through a curtained doorway. Moments later, Elias Cobb emerged, his broad frame filling the room, his weathered face set in a scowl. His oilskin coat was slung over a chair, and his hands, gnarled as oak roots, clutched a coil of rope as if it were a lifeline. "Monsieur Cobb," Poirot began, seating himself with the grace of a man accustomed to finer surroundings. "We meet again to discuss the night of Captain Reed's unfortunate demise. You claim you were here, mending nets with Madame Cobb, yet there are whispers in the village that you were seen near the harbor. A contradiction, non?" Cobb's eyes narrowed, and he dropped the rope onto the table with a thud. "Whispers ain't proof, Mr. Poirot. I was home, like I said. Ellen'll tell you the same." Ellen, standing by the curtain, nodded quickly, her hands twisting in her apron. "He was here, sir, all night." Poirot's mustache twitched, his gaze shifting between husband and wife. Bien, but let us be precise. What time did you begin your mending, Monsieur Cobb, and when did you finish? Cobb shifted, his boots scuffing the floor. Started after supper, maybe 7. Worked till near midnight. Nets take time, you know. Ellen nodded again, her eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. And during this time, you never left the cottage? Not even for a walk to the harbor, perhaps to check your own boat? Cobb's jaw tightened, a flush creeping up his neck. I told you, I was here. Ain't no call to go traipsing about in the dark. Poirot's eyes drifted to the corner of the room, where a pair of heavy boots stood by the door, their soles caked with mud that bore the distinct grayish hue of the harbor quay. Curieux, he said, almost to himself. The mud on your boots, Monsieur Cobb, is fresh, and it matches the earth by the ebony tide. A coincidence, perhaps. Cobb's scowl deepened, but he said nothing, his hands clenching into fists. Ellen stepped forward, her voice trembling. He wears those boots everywhere, sir. Could have been from earlier in the day. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned his attention to a red scarf draped over a chair, its edge frayed in a manner that stirred his memory of the thread found in the broken net. This scarf, Madame Cobb, is most striking. Has it been damaged recently? Ellen's hand flew to the scarf, her fingers brushing the frayed edge. It's old, sir, nothing more. Gets caught on things. Poirot's smile was polite but sharp. Naturellement. Yet such a thread, caught in the net of the ebony tide, might tell a different story. Cobb slammed a hand on the table, his voice rising. You're fishing in the wrong waters, Poirot. I hated Reed, sure. Everyone knew he stole my best fishing grounds, but I didn't kill him. I was here, and that's the truth. Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming yet authoritative. Calmez-vous, monsieur. I seek only the truth, and the truth, like the sea, cannot be forced. I thank you both for your time. He rose, adjusting his coat, and stepped toward the door, pausing to glance at the boots once more. Monsieur Cobb, a word of advice. The truth is a tide that cannot be held back. It will come. As Poirot stepped into the drizzle, the cottage door closing behind him, he felt the weight of their unease. Cobb's alibi was sturdy on the surface, but it cracked under scrutiny, like ice too thin to bear weight. The mud on his boots, the frayed scarf, the rehearsed certainty of Ellen's words, they were threads in a tapestry of deception, and Poirot's little gray cells were already weaving them together. He made his way back to the village, the rain pattering on his umbrella, his mind alight with the certainty that Elias Cobb had been near the harbor that night, whether he admitted it or not. The path led him past the Anchor Inn, where a group of fishermen huddled under the eaves, their voices low. Poirot caught a snippet of their talk. Cobb was always cursing Reed, said he'd see him ruined, and filed it away, another whisper to add to the chorus. The village was a maze of motives, and Cobb's rivalry was a path that demanded exploration. Yet Poirot knew the truth was not a single thread, but a knot, and he would untangle it with the patience of a man who trusted his method above all else. As the harbor came into view, the ebony tide loomed through the mist, its broken net a silent challenge to uncover the secrets it guarded. Chapter 6. The Crew Member's Secret. The drizzle had softened to a fine mist over St. Alden's Cove, veiling the harbor in a silvery haze that lent an air of secrecy to the evening. Hercule Poirot, his umbrella furled but his senses sharp, made his way to the docks, where the boats rocked gently in their moorings, their masts swaying like metronomes. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and tar, and the distant cry of a gull seemed to underscore the village's quiet unease. Poirot's destination was Tom Harrow, the young crewman of the Ebony Tide, whose nervous demeanor and bruised knuckles had caught the detective's meticulous eye. If Elias Cobb's alibi was a tide that ebbed under scrutiny, Harrow's was a current that promised hidden depths. Poirot found Harrow at the far end of the quay, crouched beside a pile of nets, his hands working deftly to mend a torn section. The lad's lean frame was hunched, his sandy hair damp from the mist, and his pale blue eyes flicked upward as Poirot approached, betraying a flicker of alarm. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said, his voice warm yet precise. "A moment, if you please. I, Hercule Poirot, would speak with you about Captain Reed and the night of his unfortunate end." Harrow's fingers paused, the needle he held glinting in the fading light. "Ain't much to say, sir," he muttered, his voice low. "I told you at the inn. I was home that night." Poirot settled onto a nearby bollard, his posture impeccable despite the damp wood, his eyes fixed on Harrow with the intensity of a lighthouse beam. "Oui, you said as much, but let us explore further, non? You were Captain Reed's crewman, trusted to handle the Ebony Tide. Yet I sense you carry a burden, monsieur. The bruise on your hand, for instance. It is not the mark of a winch, as you claimed." Harrow's hand twitched. The bruise, a purplish stain across his knuckles, stark against his pale skin. He tucked it beneath the net, but not before Poirot noted the gesture. "Clumsy, like I said," Harrow mumbled, his eyes on the net. "Happens all the time." Poirot's mustache curved slightly, a smile that held no warmth. "Clumsy, Monsieur Harrow, or perhaps the result of a struggle. Captain Reed was a strong man, yet he was overcome. A blow, perhaps, before the strangulation." Harrow's head snapped up, his face pale as the mist. "I didn't touch him, sir. I swear it. I was in my lodgings. Ask anyone." His voice cracked, and Poirot leaned forward, his tone soft but relentless. "And what of these late-night sails the captain took? The harbor-master speaks of lights on the Ebony Tide at midnight, of secretive movements. You were his crewman. Surely you knew his plans?" Harrow's fingers resumed their work, but the rhythm was unsteady, the needle jerking through the twine. "He didn't always tell me everything," he said, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes he'd sail alone, said it was for better catches. I didn't ask questions." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the lie as easily as a fisherman nets a cod. "Mon ami, a crewman does not remain ignorant of his captain's habits. The barmaid, Liza, speaks of Reed's anger over things hidden in the nets. Did you hide something, Monsieur Harrow, or discover it?" Harrow's hands stilled, and for a moment the only sound was the lap of waves against the quay. His eyes darted to the water, then back to Poirot, a trapped animal seeking escape. "I don't know what you mean, sir," he said, but his voice trembled, and Poirot saw the sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. "The captain was particular, that's all. Didn't like his gear touched." Poirot nodded as if satisfied, but his mind was a whirl of calculations. The bruise, the evasions, the nervous glances. They painted a picture of a man with a secret, one that might have led to murder. Rising from the bollard, Poirot paced slowly along the dock, his walking stick tapping a deliberate rhythm. "Monsieur Harrow, consider this. A man is dead, his net destroyed, his boat a stage for crime. You were close to him, yet you claim ignorance. The truth, it is like the sea. It cannot be hidden forever. He paused, turning to face Harrow, who had risen, clutching the net like a shield. If you know something, it is better to speak now, before the tide turns against you. Harrow shook his head, his jaw tight. I've told you all I know, sir. I didn't kill him. Poirot studied him, noting the clenched fists, the shallow breaths, the way Harrow's eyes avoided the silhouette of the ebony tide in the distance. Très bien, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. But know this, the little gray cells, they see what the eyes conceal. We shall speak again. He tipped his hat and turned away, leaving Harrow to his nets and his secrets, the mist curling around them both like a shroud. As Poirot walked back toward the village, the harbor fading into the dusk, his mind sifted through the encounter. Harrow's fear was palpable, his denials too quick, his bruise too fresh. The mention of things hidden in the nets had struck a nerve, and Poirot wondered what contraband, spirits perhaps, or something more valuable, might have been concealed in the heavy folds of the ebony tide's gear. The lad's youth made him seem an unlikely killer, but Poirot knew that desperation could drive even the young to dark deeds. The bruise suggested violence, and the evasions suggested guilt. Yet Harrow was but one piece of the puzzle, and Poirot's method demanded a broader view. The lights of St. Alden's twinkled through the mist, and Poirot paused at the edge of the quay, his gaze lingering on the dark shape of the ebony tide. The boat was a silent witness, its broken net a riddle that tied Harrow to the crime, whether as perpetrator or pawn. The sea keeps its secrets, Poirot murmured, but not from Hercule Poirot. With a final glance at the harbor, he turned toward the village, his steps steady, his mind alight with the certainty that Tom Harrow's secret would soon surface, like a buoy breaking free from the depths. Chapter 7. The Merchant's Motive. The evening had draped St. Alden's Cove in a velvet darkness, broken only by the flickering lamps of the village and the distant gleam of the lighthouse sweeping across the restless sea. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the damp chill, approached the residence of Margaret Vane, the merchant whose wealth and poise set her apart from the rugged simplicity of the fishing village. Her office, housed in a converted warehouse at the edge of the harbor, was a beacon of prosperity, its windows glowing with the soft light of oil lamps. Poirot's mission was to probe the motives of this enigmatic woman, whose dispute with Captain Amos Reed over unpaid debts hinted at deeper currents beneath her polished exterior. The door opened to reveal Margaret Vane herself, her auburn hair catching the lamplight like burnished copper. She wore a tailored dress of deep green, its elegance a stark contrast to the village's homespun garb, and a pearl brooch gleamed at her throat, a silent testament to her success. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone, "I expected you might call. Please, come in." Her smile was courteous, but her green eyes held a guarded sharpness that Poirot noted with interest. He followed her into a spacious office, its walls lined with ledgers and nautical charts, a mahogany desk dominating the center like a throne. "Madame Vane," Poirot began, settling into a cushioned chair with his customary precision, "you are a woman of influence in St. Alden's, n'est-ce pas? Your trade in Captain Reed's catch was a cornerstone of his livelihood, yet I hear of a disagreement, a matter of unpaid invoices. Perhaps you can enlighten me?" Margaret folded her hands. her posture composed, her brooch catching the light as she leaned forward. "A business matter, Mr. Poirot, nothing more. Amos owed me several £100 for fish delivered over the past season. He was slow to pay, and we had words last week. But murder?" She raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with faint amusement. "I settle my disputes with contracts, not violence." Poirot's eyes, keen as a hawk's, studied her face, noting the faintest tightening of her lips, the way her fingers brushed the brooch as if it were a talisman. "Bien, madame, but a debt unpaid can stir passions, even in one so composed. Tell me, where were you on the night Captain Reed met his end?" Margaret's gaze held his, unflinching. "In this very office, working late with my clerk, Mr. Grayson. We were balancing accounts until nearly midnight. He can confirm it." Her voice was steady, but Poirot detected a rehearsed quality, as if the words had been polished like her brooch. He glanced at the desk, where an open ledger lay, its pages filled with neat columns of figures. "Your accounts, madame, they are meticulous. May I?" Without waiting for permission, he leaned forward, his gloved fingers turning a page. The entries were detailed, but one caught his eye. A series of large payments to an unnamed supplier, marked only with initials, J.T., and dated over the past month. "These payments," Poirot said, his tone deceptively casual, "they are substantial. To whom were they made?" Margaret's smile tightened, and she closed the ledger with a deliberate snap. "A private supplier, Mr. Poirot. My business dealings are hardly relevant to Amos's death." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his growing curiosity. "Au contraire, madame. In a murder, all dealings are relevant, especially those involving large sums. Captain Reed's logbook spoke of trouble with the cargo. Could this trouble have involved your trade?" Margaret's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, her fingers tightening on the brooch. "Amos's cargo was fish, Mr. Poirot. If he had troubles, they were his own. I merely bought what he caught." Her tone was firm, but Poirot sensed a current of unease beneath her words. He rose, pacing the room with measured steps, his walking stick tapping softly. "Madame Vane, you are a woman of means in a village of modest folk. Your wealth? It comes solely from fish?" He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "Or perhaps there are other ventures, less conventional?" Margaret's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. "You're fishing in deep waters, Mr. Poirot. I am a merchant, nothing more. My success comes from hard work and shrewd bargains, not secrets." Yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness, and Poirot filed it away, another piece in the puzzle of the ebony tide. "Merci, madame," he said, bowing slightly. "Your candor is noted, but the truth, it has a way of surfacing, like a wreck after a storm. I shall trouble you no further, for now." As he turned to leave, he paused by a shelf where a small brass telescope rested, its lens pointed toward the harbor. "A fine instrument," he remarked. "You watch the ships, perhaps? Or something else?" Margaret's smile was tight. "The harbor is my business, Mr. Poirot. I keep an eye on it." Outside, the mist had thickened, cloaking the village in a ghostly veil. Poirot stood for a moment, his umbrella raised, his mind sifting through the encounter. Margaret Vane's poise was a fortress, but he had glimpsed cracks in its walls, the ledger's cryptic entries, the nervous touch of her brooch, the rehearsed alibi. Her dispute with Reed was a motive, but the payments to J.T. suggested a deeper game, one that might connect to the cargo in Reed's logbook. Was she merely a merchant, or a player in a scheme that had cost Reed his life. The harbor loomed through the mist, the ebony tide, a dark silhouette against the water. Poirot's thoughts returned to the broken net, its deliberate cuts a riddle that tied the suspects together. Margaret Vane's wealth and influence made her a formidable figure, but power, Poirot knew, often concealed vulnerability. "The sea hides many things," he murmured, "but not from Hercule Poirot." With a final glance at the warehouse, its lights glowing like eyes in the fog, he turned toward the village, his little gray cells alight with the certainty that Margaret Vane's motives held the key to unlocking the mystery of St. Alden's Cove. Chapter 8. The Smuggler's Trail. The night had wrapped St. Alden's Cove in a cloak of darkness, the moon obscured by clouds that hung low over the restless sea. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the late hour, sat in the snug parlor of the Anchor Inn, a single candle casting shadows across his notebook. The village slept, but Poirot's mind was awake, piecing together the fragments of the mystery surrounding Captain Amos Reed's murder. The broken net, the red thread, the cryptic logbook entry about cargo. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit, and Poirot sensed that the truth lay not in fish, but in contraband. His evening's task was to follow this trail, and his chosen guide was Jethro Pyle, the garrulous harbor master whose memory of the Ebony Tide's nocturnal voyages held promise. Poirot had sent for Jethro, offering a late-night glass of ale to loosen the old man's tongue. The harbor master arrived, his weathered face illuminated by the candlelight, his eyes gleaming with the curiosity of one who thrived on the harbor's secrets. "Mr. Poirot," he said, settling into a chair with a creak, "you're a persistent one, ain't you? Dragging an old man out in the dark for a chat." Poirot's smile was disarming, his mustache impeccable despite the hour. "Monsieur Pyle, the night is kind to secrets, and you, I think, know more of the Ebony Tide than you have yet shared. Another ale, perhaps, to aid the memory?" Jethro chuckled, accepting the tankard with a nod. "You're a sly one, sir. All right, what's it you're after?" Poirot leaned forward, his voice low and precise. "You spoke of lights on Captain Reed's boat at midnight, of slow movements in the fog. Tell me, monsieur, what did you see, and what do you suspect?" Jethro took a long sip, his eyes narrowing as he gazed into the candle's flame. Amos was a good man, but he'd been queer lately. 2, maybe 3 times in the last month. I saw the Ebony Tide slip out past midnight. No crew, just Amos. Come back before dawn, quiet as a ghost. Once, I saw crates unloaded, small, heavy, not fish. Covered with tarps they were, and moved quick to a cart waiting on the quay. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his pencil poised over his notebook. "Crates, you say? And who received them?" Jethro shrugged, his fingers tracing the rim of his tankard. "Couldn't see clear. Fog was thick, and I ain't one to pry too close. But the cart headed toward the village, toward the warehouses. Might have been Vane's lot. She's got the biggest storehouses round here." Poirot's mind raced, the mention of Margaret Vane's warehouses aligning with the mysterious payments in her ledger. "And did you see young Tom Harrow on these nights? Or perhaps Elias Cobb?" Jethro shook his head. "Not them, no, just Amos, and once a shadow of someone else, tall, quick, but I couldn't make 'em out." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled, the candlelight casting his shadow like a silhouette of thought. "Mon ami, you have painted a picture most intriguing. Captain Reed, I think, stumbled upon a smuggling operation, perhaps using his own boat. The broken net was no accident. It was cut to conceal or destroy what it held. Jethro's eyes widened, his voice dropping to a whisper. Smuggling, you say? Spirits, maybe? Or worse. We've had tales of such before, but Amos wasn't the type. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Was he not? Or did he discover what others wished to keep hidden? As Jethro drained his ale and shuffled out into the night, Poirot remained, his mind sifting through the harbor master's words. The crates, the midnight sails, the cart bound for the warehouses. They pointed to a scheme that transcended a simple fisherman's murder. Margaret Vane's wealth and her ledger's cryptic entries loomed large, but Tom Harrow's nervousness and Elias Cobb's proximity to the harbor could not be dismissed. The red thread, the bruised knuckles, the muddy boots, each was a clue, but the smuggling trail was the current that tied them together. Poirot rose, extinguishing the candle with a precise pinch, and stepped into the night. The village was silent, save for the distant crash of waves, and the harbor lay before him, a dark mirror reflecting his thoughts. The Ebony tide stood moored, its hull a silent sentinel, and Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on its shadowed form. The sea, he murmured, is a vault of secrets, but the little gray cells, they unlock all. The smuggler's trail leads to the killer, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall follow it. With a final glance at the boat, he turned toward his lodgings, the mist curling around him, his mind alight with the certainty that the next tide would bring him closer to the truth. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Alden's Cove, casting a pale, uncertain light across the harbor, where the Ebony tide lay moored, its black hull gleaming like a Moor. Politely, Hercule Poirot stood at the center of a small crowd gathered on the quay, his impeccable figure a stark contrast to the rough-hewn fishermen around him. The air was crisp with the tang of salt, and the cries of gulls mingled with the murmurs of the villagers, still reeling from the murder of Captain Amos Reed. Poirot had summoned the three suspects, Elias Cobb, Tom Harrow, and Margaret Vane, to the deck of the Ebony tide, under the pretext of new evidence, his intention to unsettle them and observe their reactions. His little gray cells were alight with the certainty that the truth was near, and this confrontation would be the crucible in which it was forged. Inspector Hargrove stood beside him, his weathered face tense with anticipation, as the suspects boarded the boat one by one. Elias Cobb trudged up the gangplank, his gnarled hands clenched, his scowl as dark as the clouds that had lingered over the village. Tom Harrow followed, his lean frame hunched, his pale eyes darting nervously toward the broken net still sprawled across the stern. Margaret Vane ascended last, her auburn hair pinned elegantly, her green eyes cool but wary, her pearl brooch glinting like a guarded secret. The deck creaked under their weight, and the boat rocked gently, as if echoing the tension that hung in the air. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, his mustache perfectly symmetrical. "We stand upon the stage of a crime most heinous. Captain Reed was strangled here, his net slashed with purpose, and each of you holds a piece of this puzzle. I have called you to reveal a clue that speaks louder than words." He produced his handkerchief, unfolding it to reveal the red thread he had found in the net, holding it, aloft like a banner. "This thread, Monsieur Cobb, matches the scarf in your home. Were you aboard the Ebony tide that night?" Cobb's face reddened, his fists tightening until his knuckles whitened. "I told you, I was home with Ellen. he barked, his voice rough as the sea. "That thread proves nothing, could have been caught any time." But his eyes flicked to the net, and Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hands, the defensive hunch of his shoulders. Ellen Cobb, standing at the edge of the crowd, gasped softly, her face paling as she clutched her shawl. "Madame Cobb," Poirot said, turning to her, "you swore your husband was home. Yet the village whispers of his presence here, near the harbor, in the dark hours. Will you stand by your words?" Ellen's lips trembled, and she stepped forward, her voice breaking. He was out that night, sir. Not long, just to check his boat," he said, "but he came back before midnight." Her admission drew a sharp breath from the crowd, and Cobb's scowl deepened, his eyes flashing with anger. "You fool woman," he muttered, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Merci, madame. The truth begins to surface, like a fish breaking the water." He turned to Tom Harrow, whose face had grown ashen, his bruised knuckles hidden in his pockets. "Monsieur Harrow, your hands tell a story of violence. This bruise," Poirot gestured to the purplish mark, "is fresh? From a struggle, perhaps, with a captain who discovered something you wished to keep hidden?" Harrow's breath hitched, his eyes darting to the net, then away. "I didn't fight him, sir. I told you, it was the winch." His voice was high, almost desperate, and Poirot's gaze sharpened, cutting through the lie like a blade through twine. "Monsieur, you were Reed's crewman, privy to his late-night sails. The harbor-master speaks of crates, not fish, moved in the dark. You knew of this, oui? Something hidden in the nets? Something worth killing for?" Harrow shook his head, his hands trembling as he pulled them from his pockets. "I didn't kill him. I swear it." But his voice cracked, and the crowd murmured, sensing his fear. Poirot's eyes moved to Margaret Vane, whose composure was a mask, her fingers brushing her brooch as if seeking strength. "Madame Vane, your wealth is remarkable in this humble village. Your ledger shows payments to an unnamed supplier. Large sums, tied to the nights. The Ebony tide sailed in secret. Were you part of this shadow trade?" Margaret's smile was tight, her voice cool but strained. "My business is fish, Mr. Poirot, not secrets. Those payments were for legitimate trade." Yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, and Poirot pressed forward, relentless as the tide. "Madame, a man does not die for fish alone. The net was cut to hide what it held, contraband, perhaps, that Reed discovered. Your calm is admirable, but it conceals a storm. Non?" Margaret's jaw tightened, her fingers stilling on the brooch. "You have no proof, Mr. Poirot. Accusations are not evidence." Her words were sharp, but Poirot's smile was sharper, his certainty unshaken. He paced the deck, his walking stick tapping a deliberate rhythm, his voice rising to address them all. "A crime is a puzzle, and you, messieurs et madame, are its pieces. The red thread places Monsieur Cobb at the scene, or near it. Monsieur Harrow's bruise speaks of violence, and Madame Vane's wealth suggests a motive beyond mere debts. The net, slashed with care, was a veil to hide the truth. But the truth, it rises like the tide." The suspects stood silent, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and calculation, as the crowd watched, breathless. Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping over them, his little gray cells weaving the clues into a pattern. The confrontation had cracked their facades, revealing glimpses of guilt and fear. "We shall meet again," he said, his voice a quiet promise, "and the full truth will be laid bare." As the suspects descended the gangplank, the crowd parted, their whispers rising like waves. Poirot remained on the deck, the broken net at his feet, his mind alight with the certainty that the smuggler's trail was narrowing, and the killer's identity would soon be caught in its net. Chapter 10. The Truth Unraveled. The afternoon sky over St. Alden's Cove was a canvas of slate-gray clouds, the sea beneath it churning with a restless energy that mirrored the tension aboard the Ebony tide. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the deck, his small, immaculate figure commanding the attention of the assembled suspects, Elias Cobb, Tom Harrow, and Margaret Vane, who stood in a semicircle before him, their faces a study in apprehension, defiance, and guarded calculation. Inspector Hargrove lingered near the gangplank, his arms crossed, his weathered face set in a frown of cautious anticipation. The villagers, gathered on the quay, watched in hushed silence, their eyes fixed on the drama unfolding on the boat that had become a stage for murder. Poirot's walking stick rested lightly in his gloved hand, its tip tapping the deck with a rhythm as precise as his thoughts. The broken net lay behind him, its slashed strands a mute witness to the crime, and the air was heavy with the scent of salt and expectation. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the murmur of the waves. "We have come to the moment of truth. Captain Amos Reed was strangled here on the Ebony tide, and his net was destroyed not in anger, but with purpose. The little gray cells, they have worked tirelessly, and now they reveal the story of this crime." He turned to Elias Cobb, whose grizzled face was set in a scowl, his hands clenched as if ready to strike. "Monsieur Cobb, your hatred for Captain Reed was no secret. The village speaks of your feud over fishing grounds, and your boots, caked with harbor mud, place you near this boat on the night of the murder. The red thread from your scarf, caught in the net, confirms it." Cobb's eyes blazed, and he took a step forward, his voice a growl. "I was checking my own boat. Like I said, I didn't touch Reed." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calm but commanding. "Patience, monsieur. Your presence is noted, but the killer's hands were not yours. You are a man of passion, but not of this crime." Cobb's shoulders sagged slightly, relief warring with suspicion, and Poirot's gaze shifted to Tom Harrow. The young crewman stood rigid, his pale face glistening with sweat, his bruised knuckles hidden in his pockets. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said, his tone soft but unyielding. "You were Captain Reed's trusted crewman, yet your nerves betray you. The bruise on your hand speaks of violence, and your evasions, they point to a secret. The harbor master saw crates, not fish, unloaded from this boat in the dark. You knew of this, oui? A smuggling ring, hidden in the nets of the Ebony tide." Harrow's breath hitched, his eyes darting to the net, then to the crowd, as if seeking escape. "I didn't kill him," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I swear it, sir." Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes narrowing. "Mon ami, the truth is a tide that cannot be held back. Captain Reed discovered contraband, perhaps spirits, perhaps jewels, hidden in his nets. He confronted you, did he not? And in that moment, your fear became fatal." Harrow's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes, and he sank to his knees, his hands covering his face. "It was an accident," he cried. "He found the crates, said he'd turn us in. I grabbed him just to stop him talking and he stopped breathing. I didn't mean to kill him." The crowd gasped, their whispers rising like a wave, and Hargrove stepped forward, his hand on his notebook. Poirot's voice remained steady, cutting through the chaos. And the net, Monsieur Harrow? You slashed it to hide the contraband, to make it seem a struggle had occurred?" Harrow nodded, his voice barely audible. "I panicked, sir. I cut it to get the crates out, to make it look like a fight. I didn't know what else to do." Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly, as he turned to Margaret Vane, whose composure had begun to fracture, her fingers gripping her pearl brooch like a lifeline. "Madame Vane, your role in this tragedy is no less significant. Your ledger reveals payments to a supplier, J.T., who I suspect is no merchant but a smuggler. You orchestrated this operation, using the Ebony tide to transport contraband, n'est-ce pas? Captain Reed was unaware until he found the crates, and his discovery threatened your enterprise." Margaret's lips parted, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "You have no proof, Mr. Poirot. My business is legitimate." Poirot produced a folded paper from his pocket, handed to him by Hargrove that morning, a copy of a ledger page obtained from Vane's office. "Madame, this document, secured by Inspector Hargrove, shows payments aligned with the Knights of the Ebony Tide's secret sales. The initials J.T. match a known smuggler operating along this coast, as the inspector has confirmed. You used young Harrow, a boy desperate for money, to handle the crates, but when Reed discovered your scheme, you relied on Harrow's fear to silence him." Margaret's face paled, her hand dropping from her brooch. "I never told him to kill Amos," she cried, her voice sharp with desperation. "I only wanted the goods moved. It was Harrow's doing, not mine." Poirot shook his head, his expression stern. "Madame, you set the stage for murder. Whether you wielded the hands or not, the law will judge your intent, but the truth is clear." Hargrove signaled to two constables, who stepped forward to restrain Harrow and Vane. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a tide of shock and revelation, as Harrow hung his head, tears streaming, and Vane stood rigid, her elegance no shield against the truth. Poirot turned to face the villagers, his voice carrying over the key. "The crime is solved, mes amis. Captain Reed died for his honesty, but the sea yields its secrets to those who seek with method and order. The little gray cells, they do not fail." As the suspects were led away, the crowd parted, their faces a mix of awe and sorrow. Poirot remained on the deck, his gaze lingering on the broken net, its purpose now clear. The truth had been unraveled, the smuggler's trail exposed, and the Ebony Tide was once again merely a boat, its dark drama concluded. With a final glance at the sea, Poirot descended the gangplank, his work in Saint-Malo, Alden's Cove, nearing its end. Chapter 11. The Merchant's Fall. The dusk settled over St. Alden's Cove like a heavy curtain, the sky a deep indigo streaked with the last embers of sunset. Hercule Poirot stood in the parlor of the Anchor Inn, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the worn beams and the faces of Inspector Hargrove and a handful of villagers who had gathered to hear the final act of the drama that had unfolded aboard the Ebony Tide. The arrest of Tom Harrow and Margaret Vane had sent ripples through the village, but Poirot knew the case was not yet closed until every motive was laid bare and every secret exposed. His little gray cells, ever restless, demanded a complete reckoning. Inspector Hargrove, his notebook open on the table, looked to Poirot with a mixture of admiration and impatience. "You've done it again, Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but respectful. "Harrow's confessed, and Vane's as good as caught, with that ledger tying her to the smuggling. But how did you piece it all together, And why did Vane let it come to murder? Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. Mon ami, the truth is like a net. It catches all, but only when woven with care. Let us review the threads of this crime, and you shall see the fall of Madame Vane. He paced the parlor, his steps measured, his walking stick resting lightly in his hand. From the beginning, the murder of Captain Amos Reed was no simple act of passion. The broken net, the red thread, the muddy boot prints, they were signs, not of chaos, but of calculation. The net, slashed with a blade, was not damaged in a struggle, but to conceal what it held. Contraband, smuggled under the guise of fish. The harbor-master's tale of midnight crates confirmed this, and Captain Reed's logbook, with its note of trouble with the cargo, pointed to his discovery of the scheme. Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room, ensuring every listener hung on his words. Tom Harrow, a young man swayed by greed, was the tool of this operation. His bruise, his nerves, his evasions, they betrayed his guilt. He confessed to strangling Reed in a panic when the captain threatened to expose the smuggling. But Harrow was not the mastermind. He was a pawn, manipulated by one whose ambition far exceeded his own. He turned to Hargrove, producing the copied ledger page from his pocket. Madame Vane, the merchant, was the architect. Her ledger, with its payments to J.T., a smuggler known to the authorities, as you confirmed, Inspector, revealed her role. She used the Ebony tide to transport contraband, likely spirits or jewels, to her warehouses, where they were sold for profit. Her wealth, so conspicuous in this humble village, was built on this illicit trade. When Reed discovered the crates hidden in his nets, he became a threat, and Vane's empire trembled. A villager, a grizzled fisherman, interjected, his voice rough with disbelief. But Margaret Vane? She's always been proper, above us lot. Why risk it all? Poirot's smile was tinged with melancholy. Monsieur, greed is a tide that pulls even the most refined. Madame Vane's composure, her elegant office, her pearl brooch, they were a facade, masking a hunger for wealth that knew no bounds. She did not wield the hands that killed Reed, but she set the stage, knowing Harrow's fear would do the rest. Hargrove nodded, flipping through his notebook. We've got her dead to rights with the ledger, and J.T.'s been picked up in the next town over, singing like a canary. Says Vane paid him to supply the goods, and Harrow moved them on the boat. Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene. Précisément. And Elias Cobb? His role was peripheral, his presence near the harbor a red herring. The red thread from his scarf, caught in the net, was a coincidence, perhaps from an earlier visit to the quay. His hatred for Reed was real, but his hands were clean of murder. A woman in the crowd, her shawl drawn tight, spoke up. What about Ellen Cobb, swearing he was home? Poirot's eyes softened. Madame Cobb protected her husband, as love often compels. Her lie was born of loyalty, not guilt. The truth has freed them both. The fire crackled, filling the silence as the villagers absorbed Poirot's words. Margaret Vane, now in custody, had crumbled under the weight of the evidence, her denials fading as J.T.'s confession and the ledger's damning entries closed the net around her. Harrow, racked with remorse, had detailed his actions, confirming Poirot's deductions. The crates hidden in the nets, Reed's confrontation, the desperate struggle that ended in death, and the frantic slashing of the net to cover his tracks. Poirot turned to Hargrove, his voice firm. Madame Vane's fall is complete, Inspector. She built her fortune on deception, and when threatened, she allowed a young man's fear to become her shield. The law will decide her fate, but the truth is ours." Hargrove closed his notebook, a rare smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "You're a marvel, Mr. Poirot. St. Albans won't forget this." As the villagers dispersed into the night, their whispers trailing like sea mist, Poirot stepped outside, the cool air a balm after the parlor's warmth. The harbor lay before him, the ebony tide a dark shape against the water, its secrets now laid bare. "The merchant falls," Poirot murmured, "but the sea endures." With a final glance at the village, he adjusted his hat, his little gray cells at rest, the mystery of St. Albans Cove resolved. Chapter 12. The tide recedes. The dawn broke over St. Albans Cove with a quiet serenity, the sea a shimmering mirror under a sky washed clean of the previous day's clouds. The village, though still shadowed by the tragedy of Captain Amos Reed's murder, seemed to exhale, its rhythm restored by the resolution of the crime. Hercule Poirot stood alone on the quay, his overcoat buttoned against the morning chill, his Homburg hat tilted just so, his mustache as impeccable as ever. Before him, the ebony tide bobbed gently, its black hull no longer a harbinger of secrets, but a relic of a drama concluded. The broken net had been cleared away, the deck scrubbed clean, yet the boat remained a silent witness to the truth Poirot had uncovered. Inspector Hargrove approached, his boots crunching on the gravel, his face bearing the weary satisfaction of a man who had seen justice served. "Mr. Poirot," he said, tipping his cap, "the village owes you a debt. Tom Harrow's in a cell, sobbing his heart out, and Margaret Vane's on her way to the county jail. That smuggler, J.T., is spilling everything, names, dates, the lot. You've tied it all up neater than a fisherman's knot." Poirot's lips curved into a modest smile, his green eyes glinting in the morning light. "Mon ami, the little gray cells, they do their work. But tell me, how does St. Albans fare now that the tide of deceit has receded?" Hargrove sighed, glancing at the harbor where fishermen were already hauling nets, their voices carrying across the water. "Folks are shaken, but they'll mend. Reed was well liked, and Vane's fall's a shock, her being so high and mighty. Cobb's back to his boat, grumbling as always, but his wife's got a weight off her shoulders now the truth's out." Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a line of infinite possibility. "Bien, the village heals, as the sea heals, washing away the stains of human folly." He turned to Hargrove, his expression thoughtful. "And what of the contraband, Inspector? The crates that cost Captain Reed his life?" Hargrove's face hardened. "Spirits mostly, high-grade brandy, smuggled from the continent. Vane was selling it to wealthy buyers inland, making a fortune. Reed's nets were perfect for hiding the bottles, and Harrow was desperate enough to do her bidding. J.T. handled the supply, but Vane was the brains. She's denying the murder, of course, says it was all Harrow's doing, but the judge'll sort that out." Poirot's fingers brushed his mustache, his mind replaying the mosaic of clues that had led to this moment. The red thread, a false lead that had briefly implicated Cobb, Harrow's bruised knuckles, a mark of his fatal panic, Vane's ledger, the key to her empire of deceit. "Captain Reed," he said softly, "was a man of the sea, caught in a net of greed not his own. His death was a tragedy, but the truth, it restores order." Hargrove nodded, his respect for Poirot evident. "How'd you know, sir? The net, the thread, all of it. How'd you see what we missed?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his voice a gentle cadence. Inspector, the little gray cells. They observe, they connect, they reason. The net was cut with purpose, not passion, and the heart conceals what the eyes proclaim. Harrow's fear, Vane's ambition, Cobb's anger, they were the currents of this crime, and I merely followed their flow. He paused, his gaze returning to the ebony tide. Each clue was a wave, and together they brought the tide of truth. Hargrove shook his head, a wry grin breaking through. "You're a wonder, Mr. Poirot. Will you stay on, see the village settle?" Poirot adjusted his hat, his movements precise. "Non, mon ami, my work here is done, and London calls. The sea has spoken, and I, Hercule Poirot, have listened." He turned from the harbor, his steps light despite the weight of the case, and walked toward the village, the morning mist curling around him like a farewell. As he passed the Anchor Inn, Lisa, the barmaid, waved from the doorway, her rosy cheeks bright with gratitude. The market square was stirring, women bartering fish with renewed vigor, their voices free of the fear that had lingered. Even the cliffs, rising stark against the sky, seemed less foreboding in the dawn's embrace. Poirot paused at the edge of St. Alban's, the sea stretching before him, its tides eternal and indifferent. "The truth," he murmured, "is like the sea. It yields to those who respect its depths." With a final nod to the village, Poirot walked on, his silhouette fading into the mist, leaving St. Alban's Cove to its quiet tides and the promise of calmer days.